So good morning, everybody. We're just about to start at 1 o'clock today. Hope everyone's feeling good and well. It's been an interesting week weather-wise in the UK. I've been enjoying the various different weather climates we seem to have experienced this week. It's been fun. So today we're going to be looking at the third in our series of Evaluate Strategically, Not Constantly, which is our idea of having an evaluation strategy which informs your overall approach to organisational development and helps the L&D function prove the value of its effectiveness. Feel free to join in the chat below. The chat will be live and certainly between the advertised times, and you can get in touch with us, ask questions, post questions as we go, make comments, disagree, agree, whatever you'd like to do. So, right, I think we're ready. Let's make a start. So good afternoon, everybody. It's 1 o'clock UK time, and this is the third in our free series of webinars, which give you a bit of a taster to the online courses and other approaches that we use in evaluation. So you're welcome to spend some time with us. Please feel free to join in the chat. And of course, you can contact me directly at russell@qedod.com or any of the rest of the team to talk about issues, comments, or how we can help you in a bit more detail at info@qedod.com. So this is the plan for today. Quick recap. Last time we talked about the 4 I's, the first 2 of those I's, and today we're going to talk about the final I's. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's next, questions and answers that may have occurred. If there aren't any, there won't be any, and then any next steps. That's for those of you who were interested, they're called the SELI bit. So there you go. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, we've done this already. We specialise in helping you prove the value of your L&D function, L&D programs. We used to be called trainingevaluation.com. Now we are QED Evaluation. I'm very proud of that too. And the whole point of this is to reinforce our value set, which is about helping us helping you prove the value of what you do. That's where we start, but we're also your critical friend and help you improve those processes and systems and such like that you run to develop and make sure you're developing the revenues or the value that you want. However that may be, either financial or learning or whatever is important to you. So this is our model. Which of course we've talked about many times. Last time we talked about, and the first webinar I talked about overall strategy, which is the outline. Before outside statements, we talked a little about we will talk a little bit more about the inner process. And today we're talking about the 4 I's, particularly the bottom 2, implementation and interpretation. But a quick recap for those of you who need it. Our strategy is to link your courses into the key areas so you can have an appropriate strategy to use the right tools and techniques to measure the impact so you can do overall less effort and get the results you want. And then you can focus effort in the more time-consuming elements to be able to drive the results you want. So on the right-hand box, more predictive, a lighter, quicker, simpler process. The majority of your evaluation will take place here. And on the left-hand side, more about sought after the event evaluation. We're great believers in that you don't evaluate afterwards and then discover it hasn't worked. That we see evaluation as an active process to make things happen for you, to make sure you get the results you want. So this is a way of being able to categorize your evaluation and spend the time you need in the appropriate bits. So it's not about doing Kirkpatrick, it's about doing evaluation. So the 4 I's, and as you'll see, as you may remember from last time, we talked a lot about the makeup strategy here, but obviously we're just going to be practical today. So we talked originally about identification, how we quantify and qualify the problem, making sure that the right people on the right courses at the right time, because that's a really important thing when it comes to embedding. For those of you who have mandatory courses, that's less of a problem, but then of course we have this issue of having learning terrorists or learning prisoners in the room. So this is about the consultancy phase that runs before any form of development to make sure you're getting the right solution. And of course, from identification comes better design, and it also comes better delivery, because actually what you want are is you want your learning professional delivering the sorts of outcomes that you require. So we don't actually have to spend any time with the uninformed delegates evaluating the trainer. So we think of better ways of evaluating the trainer, and that allows for a much more objective judgment of the benefit of the value that comes next. We talked about the four parties and the learning environment and how each are equal. And so there are various different tools to help that. And we introduced you to last time our pre and post manager training resource, which you can get hold of. And of course, this helps you design better interventions with better embedding. I'm going to talk a bit more about embedding today. And one of the things we did talk about last time was this learning progression where you go from awareness to knowledge. And of course, knowledge is split into theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. So the difference between what and how. And in order, you need that to build skills. And when we're thinking about design, we're looking at being able to have more practical knowledge and skills in your courses and in your programs than theoretical knowledge. And also how you focus coaching on that more practical element rather than the theory. So you're balancing and blending your learning to be able to actually enhance people's skills. And of course, if all you're interested in is that people have greater competence, or you can sign off that competence, or have competence achieved more quickly, then this is the key thing you need to know to be able to measure that later on. Again, we'll come back to that. And also, we're not interested in so much measuring behaviour on its own, because we know that behaviour is part of a process, and it's easy to measure processes, and that's where we focus. So you can see that in the 4 I's, we've moved quite a long way from the traditional way of thinking about evaluation, and we're coming up with a more robust, practical way, which is less time consuming. So more likely to be done. We talked last time about intention, and this idea that, we're looking at this idea of making sure that people are intending to deliver the things that you want them to do. And this allows you, if you're doing intention right, to be able to say, well, we know that the people here who are leaving this program have a higher intention of executing the actions that we'd like them to execute, or delivering those learning points. And the point about intention is to say, well, if that's not taking place, we can take corrective action. So the implementation phase is about supported transfer. So the issue is, if you've done prediction, the implementation phase is just checking up whether someone did what was required. So if you have designed into your program a set of actions which predict activity, and that activity is linked to value, all you have to know is that those actions have taken place. The intention stage looks at the likelihood of that happening, so we can use like a risk analysis method to help us. If we see from the end of the program that someone doesn't intend to implement or cannot implement because perhaps the manager doesn't want to, or the prevailing culture won't let them, or they're too busy and their actions or priorities is too low against the relative requirements of their job, we have a choice in the implementation phase as L&D to talk to the manager or to talk to the learner to be able to help them implement. And here we link to this idea of supported transfer, so the idea of spaced learning. So giving 2 things, giving access to more resources as time rolls on, maybe after a week, a month, 3 months, whatever you want, or this idea that we're going to make sure that the manager is linked into the process. So following any course, the manager will sit down with someone and discuss first of all, they sat down before the program, that's part of a different stage, but they will be sitting down reviewing the learning that's come, looking at the number of learning points which have been achieved, looking at those actions, and sitting down and planning and prioritizing, linking to the overall performance management system, the outcomes from that training. And we talked earlier in another podcast about making sure managers know the value and the perceived benefit of the training, so they're incentivized themselves, or interested enough, maybe it's a better way of putting it, to want to take part in that process. So as part of our strategy, this helps us understand and drive some of our management development processes to make sure that managers are interested in the implementation of learning. It is actually a fundamental part of most management jobs. So we're implementing against outcomes, and we're inspiring people to assess themselves, and also maybe managers carrying out some sort of assessment. And you only need to assess the level of impact when you want to know the result. So if you want to know if something has worked because you want to improve it, That's a different sort of impact analysis to looking at whether it's a financial result that you're looking for. And most people really do confuse those two things, and they'll say, well, no, the training's working if it's generating a financial impact. The trouble is the cost of doing the evaluation is so great that it can outweigh and put the organisation and your own function under a lot of strain in order to find those results, and sometimes it's just not useful. So sometimes looking at a more sensible, a pragmatic level of proof that the program's worked, like, did it achieve the actions that you wanted, and those actions fire off into the results anyway, then that's a better way of assessing. And I'm a firm believer that often what we're doing in the L&D world is trying to assess the impact of something which is actually outside of our sphere of influence. So you're trying to take credit or whatever at the wrong stage in the process. And the best stage in the process to evaluate training is at the point where the learner leaves, or the learner's within maybe a short period of time on a change program. Because if it hasn't changed someone's behaviours within a very short period of time, or way of looking at the world, whatever the process might be about, it's not going to. So our ability to check 3 months in the future is sort of irrelevant, because all the other variables will be playing out more strongly than the training results. Now, for me, I'm a great believer in creating a training culture where it's learner-led and reported. I like the learners to show off their learning by using actually social media groups, for example, if appropriate, or social internal intranets, action learning sets, ongoing coaching, for example. I like to create the idea that learners are going to come back and be proud of what they've achieved. And of course, this sets up a different construct in the training room, where rather than saying, did you achieve, because it's a punitive thing to sort of punish people for not, we should be thinking about how do we stimulate a positive reaction, that this is what I've done, let me show you how, and let me share my learning. And so we actually can build a more professional way of thinking about learning. And of course, you don't need to do this for every course. It's more significant to drive these results on courses with a bigger investment. If you're doing a 10-minute bit of online e-learning, you don't need to do all these things. It's about making sure that the evaluation strategy fits the nature of the program, the importance of the program, the criteria you talked about in previous webinars, and the level of practical and pragmatic resource you actually have. So implementations is outside of your scope, outside of your resources, but part of our job in L&D is to make sure that we can blend learning, give constant knowledge reinforcement, knowledge bursts. And often, for example, if we're sending out any knowledge reinforcement, that's the point where we can send out surveys, questionnaires, if we're going to use that approach. And I really would absolutely challenge the desire to constantly be pulsing the organisation. I think many organisations have what we have really identified as survey fatigue. And in some organisations, I was actually talking to one organisation recently that told me they have an employee who had seen 2 surveys per month, not from just training, all over the place, 2 surveys a month for the last 8 months. So they were filling in surveys left, right and centre, and actually after a while they just stopped bothering. So, one of the classic things we want from our people is, if we're talking about engagement, at the point when they're actually looking at their engagement, if the thing they're most annoyed about is filling in a survey, that doesn't bode well for an objective view of results. So I think part of what we're doing in L&D is to reduce the load on the organisation. And then, obviously, we talked about embedding, we've talked about the learner responsibility, the spaced idea, the managers involved, we talked about that. Team reinforcement, if you've got a team rolling through learning, how does that build together? The best learning always has some form of coaching taking place. That sometimes is the manager, sometimes an external coach, and these things should be linked together. Often they are. That expectations are managed and that action plans constantly are followed by the L&D department. Because that's the point. What you want is those actions being delivered. If the fundamental point of your thinking about learning is to drive a series of actions, then the actions are the key part of the process. Now, when it comes to interpretation, you have many choices here, many choices. Actually, too many choices, and that's part of the issue here. So we fall back on what we've always done, which is send out a survey often and do very little with it, or use SurveyMonkey. And we like the bit which are about the comments, so we just collect those things and really ignore everything else. So if we're not careful, we can end up over-measuring and undervaluing what comes back, and then people can't be bothered so much. So we need to think about what is impact and how we're going to measure it. We're going to think about how we've done against a target, maybe if we've actually had a target for the training, how is that working? And we need to think about the wider embedding. So let me just pop back to that slide again, if I may. So one of the things you have to remember here is it's appropriate to use the most useful interpretation method relative to the overall objectives that the program is meant to deliver. So if you're meant to be looking at, say, a mitigating risk, the interpretation or the measurement thing will be about risk. And I know it sounds like the statement of the obvious, but if you're using a one-size-fits-all evaluation process, you won't necessarily be getting what you want. You may be over-measuring and misallocating results, which is often the reason why the operational side of an organization doesn't value the results that L&D puts out there, because L&D can often overvalue their impact. And the reason they overvalue their impact, they say, well, we need to really show what a great job we're doing. But because you overvalue it, it loses its credibility. So, for example, I was working with an organisation where there had been a £2 million uplift on the bottom line of the organisation, and there had also been a customer service course that had run. Now, the L&D function basically said to me that the £2 million uplift on the bottom line was because of that customer service course. And so they had claimed the full value of that bottom line uplift from that course. Now, I know in a cold light of day that sounds, well, that's obvious it wasn't the case, but of course they claimed it. And so what happened next is, well, there were one or two other people in the organisation who said, I think we might have done something to do with that. Now, the actual fact was that when we worked it out, they could claim 100k's worth of value on that £2 million. But their intervention had only cost £12,000. Now that was a very, very good return on investment. But because they claimed such a huge sum, the validity, the validity and the sort of respect and the credibility that they had was diminished. And in fact, the result was extremely good, but because they'd overclaimed, it was a problem. So it's always better to underclaim and be able to show a strong decision process so you can back up your claims with some degree of evidence. Now, if you don't really need to do all that, don't measure ROI if it's not required. Make sure that you can if you need to, but you don't always have to be measuring ROI. Don't create don't create an expectation in the organisation where you need to be proving something, where they say, well, that's really interesting, can you do that for everything now? And then you're stuck because you need to. So, for example, there are also some really weird evaluation metrics we can use to help us. So, for example, we know that there are measures of engagement which come from the engagement toolkits, which allow us to allocate salary uplifts because of the effective training. Now, you might not like these things, but they're well proven. You can use it to link, reinforce, and support other things. But basically, if you're looking and measuring at things like really soft skills, you can use this sort of measurement to help you attribute some effects from morale, just coming out of a course and feeling good about yourself and feeling good about the organisation. We know that drives commitment to process. We know that drives more effort, and more effort than is sometimes required. And we know that there's productivity. We know it doesn't last for a long time, and so this measure allows us to do something about that. And this standard deviation behaviour generating a 40% one-time 40% uplift on salary to add to the thing allows us to produce a forecast that allows us to go between X and Y. We know that this course will generate that. And, it's simple, so simple. But we don't use it because we think that's too hard. Now, going back to earlier, if we're looking at a route to competence, then just measure a route to competence and how quickly it takes you to get there. If we're looking at e-learning, we need to measure knowledge. Either do you measure knowledge which is theoretical, or do you measure knowledge which is practical? Clearly what we want to do is measure knowledge that's practical, because we want to be able to test people's ability to use the information, not to be able to just quote it back to us. So it's no point saying, which year did the Battle of Waterloo take place? But what practical knowledge is about saying, well, what effect did the Battle of Waterloo have on the First World War, for example? Because then people having to think about how they apply that theoretical knowledge into a more positive frame. And of course, skills, if you want to assess those, are accessible by watching people doing it. Now, you either do that on a training course, or you can do that back in the workplace. So you have technical courses; they're often assessed on a live training course because you're seeing people doing it. And for some organisations, it's just about getting people qualified because the qualification itself is proven to have value. So it's sometimes okay in some organisations who have had people signed off having gone through the course, having the right percentage of people having a certain licence or qualification. And if that's all you need to do, that's fine. If you want to decide that the qualification has value, that's a different sort of evaluation process. But in a sense, all the training to function has to do is to deliver those people with the right level of qualification. So I know it sounds so simple, but it's about making sure the strategy is geared to just delivering what you really want to know. So here's some questions to ask yourself. And then you can use the right method. And once you've got the right method in place, you can actually adopt the right process. So is it meeting our needs? Feedback. So as a manager, say I need someone to put a course together. Here it is. Did it meet your needs? Now, of course, did they know their needs in the first place? But that's part of our job in the first I stage, to be able to help them through our consultancy skills really get to grip with that. Did it equip us to achieve our actions? That's something the delegates report on. Did it create impact? We've assessed the process. Did it create value? ROI. How could the training be better? Do a multi-stakeholder feedback review. Don't use ROI to figure out whether training could be better, because that won't tell you anything. Was it worth the money? Look at an impact review against your budget. And that's a simple cost-benefit analysis, for example. Or it was, what came out of it versus what did we want it coming out of it? And also, was it worth the money? You can measure against the perception, the perceived value of the course. And that's a very simple measure. Could have been a result in other ways, so predictive modelling helps you there. It's very simple in the operational worlds to be able to say, if I did this, would I get this? And if I did the other, would I get that? But if all we do is ram people through a training course and then put them through some sort of strange reaction campaign, it's hard to understand that. And I don't need to go all the way through this. I think you've got it. And then you've got a ton of measurement techniques open to you, and all of them should link to whatever it is you're up to. Let me just pick three. Jack Phillips, Success Case Method, and the bottom one. The rest, tons of stuff. Actually, I see Success. I'm so keen on Success Case Method. I know I have it twice. So Jack Phillips is the gold standard for me in terms of doing this level 5 is really about ROI and some more advanced ROE methods. Ours is ROT, which is return on targets. But Jack Phillips is very good, but use it very sparingly. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money, and it's only worth doing if you really, really have the criteria in place to make sure it works. And if you're going to do Jack Phillips at the end, know you're going to do that at the beginning. So you set the whole process up at the beginning. You need people reporting to you. You need people thinking about impact. You need to show people during the training how to measure impact, so that you're not doing it 6 months after and they don't know what you're talking about. It needs to be set up in a way that people are on board with what you're talking about. Now, the Success Case Method is extremely groovy, and it allows you to take the most successful person from the training and really do a very deep dive into their results. And then what you can do is show the predictive gap between the top and the bottom person and begin to ascribe a value to that. It's an attractive measure because actually normally the person that's implemented the most is the easiest to get hold of and the keenest to take part in any sort of review. The problem is that we also have people on training who are the first to volunteer, and you can get a slightly distorted view of that. But it's a good method. And bottom one, of course, the academic research method is really about using control groups to show the sort of longitudinal effects of stuff. Now, that's particularly good for a pilot where some people have gone through some training, and it really works where the volumes are going to justify the approach. But if you've got people who have gone through the training and you've got people who haven't, then you can measure the two things. What's interesting here, and I'm just saying this to all of you now, and it's a bit of our secret, is we know that there's a Hawthorne effect with training, where often the people who have gone through the control group and haven't had the training often do better, or not quite as bad as the people that have. And there's something peculiar that goes on with people who are pulsed about training and control groups. So you need to use that with caution. Again, in our more deep training, we'll talk about that in a lot more depth, how you manage that. Now, if you're going to go on and do the full-blown hooja-flippery, this is the process. So good luck on all of this. You assess the results, create the financial impact, identify the variables, rate each of the variables, assess the relative impact of the training, compare against the proper cost profile, ta-da! Return on investment. as I go through that, I get bored. And as an evaluator, I have to do this on many times. And the reason those of you who know me know I haven't much hair is the amount of time I spend ripping it out and doing this process. Because actually, by the time you normally do this sort of process, people are saying to me, I don't even remember the training, never mind the impact it had. And so that's why we need to be really clear and have our evaluation strategy ready and set up, because this sort of evaluation needs, in a way, to be operated by an external person, an external organization. I mean, I know I'd say that anyway, but wouldn't I? But because it allows you to come in and really ask the questions, the tough questions that need to be asked. And sometimes, people won't tell the L&D function the truth. Shock, horror! And of course, reporting comes in this. It's about creating reports that people value and judge, not over-claiming, using something funky. Go and look at sales and marketing, look at their dashboards. There's lots of commercial dashboard applications out there. In our own training, we show you how to use 3 or 4 of them. And, your LMS could be your biggest enemy or asset here in terms of the reports it generates. But often reporting less is more at the end of the day. Just remember that. So we talked about this earlier in different places. We're trying to change evaluation all over the place, to take it away from being a chore to saying it as part of the insight that you gain. It's about stiffening your overall L&D process and turning you from being L&D administrators sometimes to being OD practitioners. And that's so fab. As on previous webcasts, this is our book that's coming soon. It's still coming soon. I promise you it's still coming soon. We have more than just the picture now, you'll be pleased to know. We have the back cover as well. Now it's all taking shape, and hopefully you'll be able to access that. It'll be a right riveting read, I think, as they say. But also, please go onto our website. We've got sorts of resources, webinars, toolkits, and such like. And if you want to talk to us, happy to chat on the phone, happy to chat about various bits and pieces. If you want to see what else is happening, have a look at our current evaluation activity, or evaluation news, as it's often called. You can contact me, russell@qeod.com. I'm conscious I've been whittering on for a while. It's been my pleasure to talk to you on today's webinar. Please join us for others, and until then, happy evaluating.